Hi, my name is Kelly Hearn. I am here today to talk about a national law that affects the functioning of schools, students, and teachers in the country in which you live, which is China in my case. There was a little leeway in this assignment that if you work for an international school, you could discuss policies that affect that school. If the national law, there wasn't a relevant national law, I'm hoping that that wiggle room can be applied to what I'm going to talk about, which is a law in China passed last summer that bans K through 12 after school tutoring, as well as what the New York Times says is a $100 billion test prep industry. Okay? So you need to know a little bit about Chinese culture to understand the implications of this law. So first of all, Chinese culture, Chinese parents, let's say, who want their children to succeed in life are obsessed with test taking, okay? China's educational system relies mostly on rote memorization and sort of mechanical skills, and it's basically test oriented. And why is that? Well, that's because China has something called the Gaokao, which is the National College Entrance Exam. Now in America, if you want to get into a college, the college will look at your grades, your standardized test scores, your extracurricular activities, and your references, among other things, right? So that's not the case in China. China depends on one exam. Now why is that? Well, it is a tool, it's seen by its proponents as a tool of equity, because there is a vast wealth gap in China, and so the government wants to ensure that a kid in a rural town in the impoverished province of Gansu can compete for a spot in a university with a wealthy kid from Shanghai who's been to the best schools and gotten extracurricular tutoring and that sort of thing. So everything for many Chinese parents is focused for their child from sometimes even kindergarten. Everything is focused on this Gaokao test, okay? So one of the ways that Chinese parents prepared their children for the Gaokao was to send them to these after-school tutoring companies. When I first came to China, I had my TEFL certificate and I wanted to be a teacher. I went to work for one of these companies, and it was a national chain. It was very fancy, very expensive. It was funded by US investors. And they had a very well-developed curriculum that was delivered all in English to these students who would study all day at their private or public school, and then after school they would come to this company and be taught by people like me. Okay, so just to tell you a little bit of a personal story, I started my own school after a couple of years with my wife, and I grew it I got a room in a little art school, and I had one student, and 4 years later we had 350 students and 8 teachers. Okay, now why is that? It's because the drive that parents have to make their students succeed cannot be overstated, okay? So now the situation is this. Many Chinese parents have a couple of problems. Number one, the reason for this law, I said, was to create social equity, but there was another reason. There is in China a demographic problem by which there are too many older people and not enough young people. And the government, they used to have a one-child policy, now they're trying to encourage families to have more kids. And knowing that your average Chinese parent in cities, your average middle-class parent, spends a lot of money on after-school tutoring. A lot of their disposable income goes to these companies like the one I had and the one where I worked. The government, by eliminating those places, believes that the parents will have more disposable income and will decide to have a second child. Okay, so that's another motivation for it. But going back to the parents, a lot of parents tell me they still have great anxiety because the Gaokao has an English component in it, and they believe that the Chinese educational system in general does not provide a strong English education. So that's one thing. Number two, a lot of these parents work overtime, and so these schools like I had and these companies that I worked for were kind of like babysitters for them, so they could have a place for their kid to go. They would help with their homework, but they knew their kids would be safe. And number three, a lot of Chinese parents are critical of this law because they say even though its primary intent was to create equity, what it's actually done is to create more inequality. Why is that? Well, now the richest of parents will find private tutors, and private tutors are much more expensive than the Peishu Jigo, which was that's what they call training schools. So a parent could, a middle-class parent could afford to send their child to Rise, this company where I worked, or another, maybe a cheaper one, but they might not be able to afford the individual one-on-one tutoring, which is very expensive. So in summary, the law banned test preparation, the law banned after-school tutoring. It was designed as a tool of social equality, but it turns out that it may be increasing student inequality. I hope that was clear.